Hi, Joe. Thank you so much for being with us today and for agreeing to be our first speaker for our CRAE Seminar Series. So just to start off, can you tell us broadly what your research interests are?
Yes, and thank you for having me, Mel. My research focuses on development to have a better understanding of the mechanisms of what drives successful outcomes within education. So my research focuses on development in autism, but also Williams syndrome, Down syndrome, Sotos syndrome. And I'm particularly interested in educational outcomes such as transition, the EHCP support, but also very specifically mathematical abilities.
Great. So in terms of what you'll be presenting for us today, what was the study about?
So in this study, we looked at the transition process for children who are moving from the end of primary school to a new secondary school. And we focused on 3 developmental disorder groups. So we have those with autism, Williams syndrome, and Down syndrome. And in the talk, I'll explain a little bit more why we specifically look at these 3 groups and how that can help us understand more about whether the experiences of a transition process are unique or whether there are certain overlaps. Because obviously, we know from previous research in autism that it's a difficult process for children with autism in terms of, the finding the right school, the stresses, concerns that come with it, but also how they settle into their new environment in the new school.
Great. So for those who can't join us for the talk today, what are some of the results that you'd like to highlight? And what's the big takeaway from the study?
So the big takeaway is that there are some differences, a lot of individual differences about how smoothly this transition process goes. But actually, we didn't find any differences between the 3 groups. So the difficulties related to, for example, finding the right school is a big problem for those with autism. But we also find it's a big problem for children who have Williams syndrome or children who have Down syndrome. So it doesn't seem to be a unique experience. But there are obviously for some, this process is easier than for others. And so we're trying to figure out more of what kind of things the schools are doing and how that can have a more positive impact. So some schools are sending lots of detailed information, which helps children to settle in and to kind of know what they're going to be, what they can expect when they go into secondary school, while other schools provide very little information. And that can be an issue sometimes. We also see big differences between what parents are worried about, what children are worried about, and what teachers are worried about. So for example, bullying is something that lots of children are worried about, that they're going to be bullied when they're going to the new school or making friends. And that's the same for all the 3 groups we looked at. And parents mention this as well, but parents also have more concerns around environmental changes, like how is my child going to cope with a larger school or with the fact that they have to travel further to go to this new secondary school. Whereas for teachers, it's more academic concerns and environmental concerns, but no concerns about bullying at all, which was quite surprising to us. So those were kind of the main findings of our study.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. And just to end, what do you think are the implications of this research and this study in particular?
Well, there are a number of implications. I think the first one is an implication for local authorities in that many parents find it difficult to find the right school. And what that means is that it would be good if local authorities can do more about advertising the different types of schools parents can choose from and how that process works in terms of what is the offer, the local offer in terms of possible schools in the area. The other impact is related actually to what schools can do. So schools often start the transition process at the beginning, so the autumn term of year 6. But actually at that time, many parents haven't yet got a confirmation of which schools are possible. So actually the transition process should start a lot earlier. As well. And I forgot to tell you, Mel, another finding that we got from our study was we looked at whether having an EHCP or not having an EHCP made a difference in terms of the transition process. And we found it didn't make a difference. But so basically, the point around, starting to plan earlier is important for those who have an EHCP as well as those who don't have an EHCP across the 3 groups. And then obviously there are other issues related to what schools can provide to support children who are going to transition to a new school, in terms of a lot of children in our study, when it came to the end of year 6, they still hadn't had any information such as a map of the school, who was going to be in the school, how they would go to school, where they could have their lunches, what their lunch would entail, etc. So I think, you know, the more information schools can provide, so these are secondary information that secondary schools can provide to students, the better they can be supported through their transition.